bald head. And he would just tell me the most amazing stories that I had ever heard. Now, of course, at the time, being 9 years old, they were not stories. No. They were moments of enlightenment and truth. I was being endowed with knowledge from on high because, now keep in mind, Uncle Cleo did not have more than a second grade education, but he knew stuff they didn't even teach in the public schools. Uncle Cleo could tell you why the rabbit has a bushy tail, because, it used to be long. He could tell you why the turtle shell is cracked and crusted and broken in many places. Uncle Cleo knew it all. I remember this one particular time we were in the living room, and he was telling me one of his stories. And Aunt Mabel, his wife, was at the stove. And when she heard him launch into one of his stories, she turned around real slow with this big black iron skillet in her hand, shaking it, looking at him. Now, as memory serves me correctly, I don't remember her cooking a lot in that frying pan. So I was never really sure if it was for cooking or keeping Uncle Cleo in check. But she'd say, "Cleo, why you tell that boy all that rubbish? Tain't none of it true." And I remember even then being like, why would she say that? It's all true. And so she would tell me these stories, but the most amazing thing about that particular moment was Uncle Cleo didn't blink. He leaned forward, he listened to Aunt Mabel and kind of nodded real slow without saying a word. Got up, walked across the living room floor, opened the screen door, went out, sat on the porch in this old worn rocking chair. And of course I was expected to follow, and heel to toe, I was right behind him. Pulled up the little footstool, sat on it, and listened to what Uncle Cleo would say next. And then after he settled his old worn bones inside that rocking chair, kind of leaned forward and looked at me and he said, "Let me tell you something about women folk. Now, what you gotta do is just lean forward, kind of nod your head and listen without really listening to him." And I remember sitting there saying, "Okay, And no, not like that. Not like a little puppy dog. You're going to give yourself away. You just very quietly just lean in while you're thinking about the ball game or squirrel hunting or something." Now, I need to let you know, especially there's a few lady friends in here that I know, that I didn't take all of Uncle Cleo's advice. So if you're talking to me and I'm looking and nodding, I'm really listening. So then went on and say, she's talking about I ain't got no sense at all. Let me tell you something. There was a time, and I knew I was in for a treat, when folks didn't have no common sense at all. Nobody. Well, back in those days, there was a wise fella lived up in the barn. He had some wisdom and some smarts. And there was a coyote who lived in the backwoods. He was a smart fella. And a few rich white folk in town. But that was about it. And so there was this boy, his name was Little John. And then Uncle Cleo had this way of just stopping. You know why they called him Little John? And I realized real soon, real early in the trip, there was no right way to answer Uncle Cleo. Because had I said, "No, I don't know why they called him that, sir," he leaned forward. His old eyelids would peer over his eyeballs, and he'd just stare at me. With his long fingernails, he'd poke me in the forehead. He said, "Don't they teach you anything in California?" Or if I said, "Well, yes, sir, I think I know the answer," he'd lean over, peer at me, and he'd say, "You think you know something, you little uppity upstart." And then he'd thump me in the forehead. So what I wound up doing was taking the road less thumped. And in this particular situation, I said, "No, sir, I don't think I know why they call him Little John." And he leaned forward and peered at me and he said, "They called him Little John on the count of he was a little fella and his name was John. Don't they teach you anything?" So little John had this notion to gather up all the common sense in all the world. And so he snuck up on the coyote while he was sleeping in the daytime, and the wise old owl did the same thing and got their common sense and snuck up on those few rich white folk and got their smarts and stuffed them in this big old burlap sack. Little John tied it around his neck, and he figured he'd climb up this tree. He hanged the common sense up where couldn't nobody reach it from him. And if anybody needed an answer to a question or some smarts, they had to come through him and get a pretty penny for it. And so as he was climbing up that tree, problem was, the more he climbed, he'd snag that burlap bag on a branch or a twig or something, and it'd go spilling over, and a little bit of common sense would fall out. And so he'd have to gather that back up and stuff it back in the bag. And he'd climb a little higher and catch it on the twig, and it would rip open, and he'd have to stick his finger in the burlap bag and try to hold that common sense in. He was having a hard time about it. And then this little fella, couldn't have been no bigger than 4 or 5 year old, knee-high to a whippersnapper. He'd been watching the whole thing, and he looks up at little John, just laughing and pointing. Don't you know nothing at all? Little John looks at the fella. He says, "What you laughing at, little fella?" Then Uncle Cleo just stopped. Want to know what he was laughing at. And he had this way of working my emotions and playing with me. So by this time, he had me, and I said, "Uh-huh." And what did I say that for? I just ruined the whole story. He looked at me and said, "Did you just say, uh-huh?" Boy, don't you not never say uh-huh to me or any other adult. Don't you know that's the word the devil made up? No, sir. I didn't know that. Yes, sir. See, devil was working down yonder, shoveling coal and whatnot, and he was a little short of help, so he was waiting on some reinforcements to come on down from California. And so while he was waiting on the help, he decided he'd fly up to heaven, grab himself some angels to come help him out a little bit. So that's exactly what he does. He flies on up, sneaks in the back east gate. Devil's a big fella, so compared to the angels, they was pretty small. So he grabbed up a couple of them, put them under his armpit. Grabbed up a bunch of more angels and put them under this armpit. Grabbed up some more, and you know that's where they get the term, the pit of hell. So he grabs some more and wraps his tail around them angels and finally grabs a handful and stuffs them in his mouth and flies on back down yonder. And while he's flying low to the earth, this fella in a straw hat sees him. He says, "Hey, devil, so you went and got yourself some angels to help you out." Devil got a big old broad smile on his face. He says, "Yes, sir." And the angels go flying all out of the devil's mouth, and then when he goes to reach for it, they go flying from underneath those armpits there, and his tail come unwind. Before he know it, he didn't have one angel left to help him. So he had to fly back up to heaven, sneak back into East Gate, grab some angels on his armpit, round his tail, stuff some in his mouth, and fly back down yonder. Well, as he's flying real low to the earth again, he sees that same fella in that straw hat. Fella takes off his hat and says, "Hey, devil, so you went and got yourself some more angels." Devil looks at him, says, "Mm-hmm." And that's why that's the word the devil made up. Don't you not never say that to me again, boy.